I stood at the end of the pier, my phone trembling in my hand. The champagne glass slipped from Cassidy's fingers and shattered against the yacht's deck. She stared at me through the cabin window, her lipstick smeared, some guy's hand still on her waist. Behind her I could see the party continuing. Laughter, music, people who had no idea that my half-brother Jareth was lying unconscious, in intensive care, with machines keeping him alive. "Braden?" she called out, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" I held up my phone, showing her the hospital bracelet photo I'd just taken. The one with Jareth's name on it. The one that said critical condition. Her face went white. "Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening from?" The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I was staring at my economics textbook, cramming for a midterm that suddenly didn't matter anymore. Dad's voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. "Braden, you need to get to Memorial Hospital. Now. Jareth's been in an accident." I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove through empty streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Jareth was my half-brother, 8 years older, built like a tank from years of construction work. He was the kind of guy who fixed everything. Broken faucets, broken hearts, broken family dinners when Dad and I couldn't find words. The idea that something could break him felt impossible. The hospital parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few cars scattered under flickering lights. I found Dad pacing by the emergency room entrance, still in his work coveralls from the shop. His face looked like it had aged 10 years since I'd seen him 3 days ago. Maribel, Jareth's mom, sat on a bench nearby, her nurse's uniform wrinkled, her usually perfect hair falling in her face. "What happened?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Dad stopped pacing and looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before. Hollow, scared, guilty. "Scaffolding collapsed at the Morrison site. 3 stories. Jareth was underneath it." His voice broke on my brother's name. Steel beams, concrete, everything came down on him. Maribel looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd been more of a mother to me than my own mom ever got the chance to be. Mom died when I was 12, cancer taking her in 6 brutal months. Maribel stepped in without being asked, making sure I had lunches packed, homework checked, someone to talk to when Dad worked late at the shop. Now she looked broken herself. "They've been working on him for 4 hours, she whispered. "Internal bleeding, head trauma, broken ribs, collapsed lung," the doctor said. She couldn't finish the sentence. I sat down beside her and took her hand. It was cold, shaking. "He's going to make it. Jareth's tough. Remember when he fell off that roof 2 summers ago? Walked it off like it was nothing. This isn't a roof, Braden. This is different." Dad's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "The doctor said if he makes it through the next 48 hours he might have a chance." Might. We sat in that waiting room as the hours crawled by. Vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt water. Uncomfortable plastic chairs that made your back ache. The smell of disinfectant and fear. Other families came and went, their own tragedies playing out in whispered conversations and tear-stained faces. But we stayed, holding our vigil, waiting for news that felt like it might never come. Around sunrise I realized something that made my stomach drop. "Where's Cassidy? Shouldn't she be here by now?" Dad and Maribel exchanged a look I couldn't read. Maribel cleared her throat carefully. "We called her right after we called you. She said she was on her way, but that was hours ago." I pulled out my phone and tried calling my sister-in-law. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. A cold knot formed in my chest, the kind you get when something's wrong but you can't put your finger on what it is yet. "Maybe her phone died," I said, not believing it myself. "Or maybe she's stuck in traffic," but even as I said it, I knew something was off. Cassidy loved Jareth more than anything in the world. At least that's what I'd always believed. She was the kind of wife who packed his lunch every morning, called him twice a day just to hear his voice, never missed one of his softball games. The Cassidy I knew would have broken every speed limit getting to this hospital. The doctor finally emerged from the surgical wing at 8:15 a.m., his scrub stained with blood that might have been my brother's. Dr. Hensley was a tall man with kind eyes that had probably delivered news like this too many times. He walked toward us slowly and I could tell from his expression that the news wasn't good. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," he began, but his tone suggested there was a but coming. "We stopped the internal bleeding and repaired the damage to his lung. However, the head trauma is severe. He's in a coma and we won't know the extent of the brain injury until he wakes up. If he wakes up." The words hit us like another collapsing building. Maribel sobbed into her hands. Dad just stared at the doctor like he was speaking a foreign language. I felt the world tilt sideways, everything I thought I knew about life suddenly uncertain. "Can we see him?" I managed to ask. "One at a time for a few minutes. But I want you to prepare yourselves. He doesn't look like himself right now. The machines, the tubes, the swelling, it's a lot to process." Dad went first. He came back 15 minutes later, his face pale and drawn. Maribel went next, and I could hear her crying through the ICU doors. When it was my turn, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Jareth lay motionless in a bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and kept him alive. His face was swollen beyond recognition, purple and yellow bruises covering every visible inch of skin. Tubes ran down his throat, IVs snaked into both arms, and a machine breathed for him with mechanical precision. This wasn't my big brother who taught me to throw a curveball, who gave me my first beer when I turned 18. Who walked me through my first heartbreak with patience and terrible advice that somehow helped anyway. This was a broken stranger who looked like he might disappear if I turned away. I pulled up a chair and took his hand. It was warm but lifeless, no response to my touch. "Hey, big brother," I whispered. "You need to wake up. We need you. I need you. And where the hell is your wife?" By noon we'd settled into the rhythm of the ICU waiting room. Dad had called in sick to the shop for the first time in 5 years. Maribel had arranged for someone to cover her shifts at the children's hospital where she worked. I'd emailed my professors about missing midterms. Our entire world had shrunk to this sterile corridor and the 15-minute visits we were allowed every few hours. Still no sign of Cassidy. I'd called her 12 more times. Her voicemail box was full now. I'd sent texts that showed as delivered but never read. Dad had tried calling her office. Cassidy worked for Premium Properties, one of the bigger real estate firms in town, but they said she'd called in sick for the week. Said she had a family emergency. If she has a family emergency, shouldn't she be here? I asked Dad during one of our coffee runs to the cafeteria. He stirred sugar into his cup with mechanical precision, not meeting my eyes. "Marriage is complicated, son. People handle crisis differently. Maybe she can't deal with seeing him like this." But I knew Cassidy better than that, or at least I thought I did. She'd been part of our family for 3 years, married to Jareth for 2. She was the one who organized every holiday, remembered every birthday, made sure we all stayed connected even when life got busy. She wasn't the type to fall apart when things got tough. If anything, she was usually the one holding everyone else together. Maribel came back from her latest visit looking more worried than before. She'd been a nurse for 25 years, so when she looked concerned about medical stuff, the rest of us paid attention. "The swelling in his brain isn't going down as fast as they'd hoped," she said quietly. "Dr. Hensley wants to try a new medication, but there are risks. It could help reduce the pressure, or it could cause complications with his heart." "What kind of complications?" Dad asked. "The kind where we might lose him anyway." We sat with that information in silence. Outside the waiting room windows, normal people were living normal lives. Cars driving by, people walking dogs, kids probably complaining about homework. Meanwhile, we existed in this bubble of fear and antiseptic smell, where every hour felt like a year and every decision could mean life or death. Around 3 p.m., I decided I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to find Cassidy. Not just because Jareth needed her here, but because her absence was starting to feel like its own kind of emergency. I told Dad and Maribel I was going to check on the house, make sure everything was secure, maybe see if there were any clues about where she might be. Jareth and Cassidy lived in a nice development about 20 minutes from the hospital. 2-story colonial with a big yard, 2-car garage, the kind of place that said, "We're doing well but not showing off about it." Jareth had put in overtime for 2 years to save up for the down payment. He was so proud when they finally got the keys. The house looked normal from the outside. Cassidy's silver Honda was gone, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was finding the front door unlocked. Cassidy was paranoid about home security, always double-checking locks, setting the alarm system even for quick trips to the grocery store. Inside, the house felt wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. It was too clean, like someone had been scrubbing away evidence. The kitchen counters gleamed, not a dish in the sink, not a crumb on the table. Cassidy was neat, but she wasn't obsessive about it. Jareth used to joke that she'd leave coffee rings on furniture just to prove she was human. I walked through the living room looking for signs of whatever had happened here. Family photos smiled down at me from the mantel. Jareth and Cassidy's wedding, holiday gatherings, vacation shots from their trip to Colorado last summer. They looked happy in every picture, genuinely happy in a way that made their friends jealous and made me believe in love again. After watching my parents struggle for years before Mom got sick. But something was missing from these photos, and it took me a few minutes to figure out what. The most recent ones from the past few months were gone. The spots where they used to sit were clean rectangles on the dusty shelf, like someone had carefully removed specific memories. Upstairs, their bedroom looked like a hotel room, bed made with military precision, not a single personal item out of place. Cassidy's jewelry box was closed tight, her perfume bottles lined up like soldiers. It was the master bathroom that finally made my skin crawl. Jareth's toothbrush was gone. His deodorant, his razor, his contact lens case, all of it missing, like he'd never lived there at all. But Cassidy's stuff remained, organized and untouched. I opened the medicine cabinet and found it half empty, with clean spots where bottles used to be. Someone had been erasing my brother from his own house. I was about to leave when I heard a car in the driveway. My heart jumped, thinking maybe Cassidy had finally come home, but when I looked out the window, I saw a red Mercedes I didn't recognize. A man in an expensive suit got out, looked around nervously, then walked to the front door. He had a key. I hid in the upstairs hallway and listened as he moved through the house. He was looking for something specific, opening drawers, checking closets, muttering to himself in frustration. After about 10 minutes, he made a phone call. "It's not here," he said in a low voice. "Whatever you're looking for, she already moved it." "Yeah, I checked everywhere. Look, this is getting too complicated. If someone finds out I've been here..." There was a long pause. "Fine. But after this, I'm done." This wasn't part of the deal. He hung up and left as quickly as he'd arrived. I waited until his car disappeared before coming downstairs, my mind racing with questions I was afraid to ask. Who was that man? What was he looking for? And how did he have a key to my brother's house? I needed to get back to the hospital, but first I did something that felt like a betrayal. I searched through Jareth and Cassidy's personal papers, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Bank statements, insurance policies, mortgage documents, everything seemed normal at first glance. Then I found Cassidy's laptop hidden in a bedroom closet, buried under a pile of seasonal clothes. It was password protected, but Jareth had told me once that Cassidy used the same password for everything, their anniversary date, plus her maiden name. It worked on the second try. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Email threads with divorce lawyers dating back 3 months. Real estate listings for apartments across town, and most damning of all, a chain of messages with someone named Marcus, full of intimate details that no married woman should be sharing with anyone but her husband. The most recent message was from yesterday, just hours before Jareth's accident. "Can't wait to be free of all this. 1 more week, and we can finally be together without hiding." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. Cassidy had been planning to leave Jareth for months. She'd been having an affair, lining up lawyers, looking for a new place to live. And now, while my brother fought for his life, she was nowhere to be found. But that still didn't explain where she was or who that man had been or what he was looking for in their house. I drove back to the hospital faster than I should have, my head spinning with information I didn't want to believe. When I walked into the waiting room, Dad and Maribel looked at me hopefully, like maybe I'd found some reasonable explanation for Cassidy's absence. Instead, I had to tell them that our family was falling apart in ways we hadn't even imagined yet. I couldn't bring myself to tell Dad and Maribel about the laptop right away. They looked so broken already, so desperate for any good news, that adding betrayal to their grief felt cruel. Instead, I made an excuse about needing some air and went outside to call the one person I knew could help me make sense of what I'd discovered. Tanner Walsh had been Jareth's best friend since high school. He was a private investigator now, the kind of guy who specialized in insurance fraud and cheating spouses. If anyone would know how to handle this situation, it would be him. "Jesus, Braden," Tanner said when I explained what I'd found. "You sure about what you saw on that laptop?" I wish I wasn't. I paced the hospital parking lot, my breath visible in the cold air. "Tanner, there was someone at their house today. Some guy with a key, looking for something. This is bigger than just an affair." There was a long pause. When Tanner spoke again, his voice had gone professional. "Careful. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't mention any of this to your dad or Maribel yet. Don't confront Cassidy when she shows up. And whatever you do, don't go back to that house alone." "Why? What do you think is going on?" "I don't know yet, but cheating wives don't usually have strange men searching their houses with keys. This smells like something criminal, maybe insurance fraud, maybe worse." "How much life insurance does Jareth carry?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never thought about it before, but construction workers in dangerous jobs usually carried substantial life insurance policies. It was just smart planning. But now, with Jareth lying unconscious and his wife missing in action, that smart planning looked like something much darker. "I don't know the details," I admitted, "but probably a lot. His job is dangerous, and they have a mortgage, car payments." "I'm going to make some calls," Tanner said. "In the meantime, keep your eyes open. If Cassidy shows up, watch her carefully. And if you see that man again, get his license plate number, but don't approach him. Call me immediately." I hung up feeling like I was drowning. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was passing an economics exam. Now I was investigating my sister-in-law for potential insurance fraud while my brother lay dying. The world had tilted so far off its axis that nothing made sense anymore. When I got back to the waiting room, I found Dad talking quietly with a police officer. My stomach dropped, thinking something had happened to Jareth, but the officer was just finishing up a routine report about the construction accident. Workplace safety violations, insurance claims, the kind of paperwork that follows industrial accidents. "Officer Martinez," Dad was saying, "we still haven't been able to reach my son's wife. She's not answering her phone, and she hasn't been to the hospital. Is there any way you could do a welfare check?" The officer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, looked sympathetic but not particularly concerned. "Missing person reports require 48 hours unless there's evidence of foul play. Has Miss Cassidy shown any signs of depression, suicidal ideation, substance abuse?" "No, nothing like that," Maribel interjected. "She's always been responsible, caring. This isn't like her at all." Officer Martinez made a note. "I can drive by their house, make sure there are no obvious signs of disturbance. But unless we find something suspicious, there's not much more we can do right now. She's an adult, and technically taking some time to process trauma isn't unusual." After the officer left, I sat with Dad and Maribel, trying to figure out how to handle what I knew. The truth would devastate them, but keeping quiet felt like another kind of betrayal. While I wrestled with the decision, Maribel went to check on Jareth, and Dad got a phone call from the shop. "Braden, I have to run over there for an hour," Dad said after he hung up. "The insurance adjuster wants to inspect the equipment we borrowed to Morrison Construction for the project. I'll be back as soon as I can." Being alone in the waiting room gave me time to think, which turned out to be dangerous. Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last. Maybe Cassidy had been planning Jareth's accident. Maybe she'd sabotaged the scaffolding somehow. Maybe she was already collecting on his life insurance, planning to disappear with her lover once the coast was clear. Or maybe I was losing my mind with grief and suspicion, seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking for her. Some things are better left alone." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Someone was watching me, knew I'd been to the house, knew I was asking questions. This confirmed that whatever was happening with Cassidy was bigger and more dangerous than a simple affair. I was about to call Tanner when I saw her. Cassidy walked through the hospital entrance, wearing designer sunglasses and a black dress I'd never seen before. She looked perfect, hair done, makeup flawless, not a wrinkle in her clothes. She looked like someone who'd been at a spa retreat, not someone whose husband was fighting for his life. But it was her demeanor that really caught my attention. She didn't rush to the information desk or look frantically for signs pointing to the ICU. She walked slowly, deliberately, like someone who already knew exactly where she was going and wasn't in any hurry to get there. "Cassidy," I called out, standing up from the waiting room chair. She turned toward me, and for just a second I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Not grief or worry or relief at seeing family. It was calculation, like she was figuring out what story to tell me. Then the mask slipped back into place, and she rushed toward me with tears in her eyes. "Oh my God, Braden, I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. I've been so worried I could barely function. How is he? Is he going to be okay?" She threw her arms around me in a hug that felt rehearsed. I hugged her back, but everything about it felt wrong. Her perfume was different, expensive, her clothes were new, and there was something else, something that made me step back and look at her more carefully. She was tan, Not the kind of tan you get from a few minutes in the sun, but the deep, even color that comes from hours on a boat or a beach. The kind of tan that takes days to develop. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We've been calling you for almost 24 hours. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that came away clean. No makeup, no real tears. "I was at my sister's place upstate. I needed to process the news, and I knew if I came here immediately, I'd fall apart and be no help to anyone. You know how I get in medical situations." It was a reasonable explanation, except for 3 problems. First, Cassidy didn't have a sister. She was an only child, something she'd mentioned dozens of times at family gatherings. Second, there was no cell service upstate that would explain 24 hours of unreturned calls. And third, she just claimed to be bad with medical situations, but she'd volunteered at the Children's Hospital, where Maribel worked for the past 2 years. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, but she delivered them with such conviction that I almost doubted what I'd discovered at their house. "Let me see him," she said, looking toward the ICU doors. "I need to see my husband." As we walked down the corridor, I watched her carefully. She moved like someone steeling herself for a performance, not like a woman about to see her critically injured husband for the first time. At the door to Jareth's room, she paused and took several deep breaths, like an actress preparing for a difficult scene. I stayed outside, but I could see her through the window. She sat beside his bed and took his hand, whispering things I couldn't hear. From a distance, it looked like the picture of a devoted wife maintaining vigil over her injured husband. But I noticed she kept checking her phone. When she came out 15 minutes later, her eyes were red and her face was streaked with what looked like genuine tears. For a moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe she really had been at a friend's house, processing grief in her own way. Maybe the laptop emails were old, the divorce plans abandoned. Maybe the man at their house had been a contractor or a neighbor with a spare key. Then she asked the question that confirmed all my suspicions. "Has anyone mentioned life insurance yet? I should probably call his work, make sure all the paperwork is filed correctly. You know, just in case. Just in case." Like she was already planning his funeral. Maribel returned from the cafeteria at that moment and saw Cassidy for the first time since the accident. The reunion should have been emotional, 2 women who loved the same man, comforting each other through crisis. Instead, it was awkward and formal, like distant acquaintances meeting at a funeral. "I'm so glad you're finally here," Maribel said, but her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "We were starting to worry something had happened to you too." "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have been here from the beginning. Cassidy's voice trailed off, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time since arriving. "This is all so overwhelming." Maribel studied her with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading people in crisis. Whatever she saw didn't seem to reassure her. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters." But even as she said it, I could tell Maribel was thinking the same things I was. Something about Cassidy's appearance, her demeanor, her explanations didn't add up. The woman standing in front of us looked like she'd been on vacation, not maintaining vigil over a dying husband. Dad returned from the shop around dinner time, and his reunion with Cassidy was even more strained. He hugged her briefly, asked if she was okay, then seemed to run out of things to say. The easy relationship they'd always had was replaced by something careful and polite. As evening approached, we settled into a new routine. The 4 of us taking turns visiting Jareth, sharing updates from the doctors, trying to maintain hope in the face of increasingly worrying reports. But underneath the surface, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Cassidy's phone rang constantly, and she kept stepping away to take calls in private. When I asked who was calling, she said it was her boss, insurance companies, concerned friends. All reasonable explanations that felt like lies. Around 10 p.m., she announced she was going home to get some rest and a change of clothes. She promised to be back first thing in the morning, kissed Jareth's forehead during one final visit, and left with the same calculated composure she'd arrived with. "Something's not right," Maribel said quietly after Cassidy was gone. "That's not the woman who married my son." Dad nodded slowly. She seemed different, distant, like she was here out of obligation rather than love. I could have told them everything then, the laptop, the emails, the man searching their house. But something held me back. Maybe it was hope that I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for everything I'd discovered. Maybe it was fear that the truth would destroy what was left of our family. Or maybe it was the text message I'd received, warning me to stop looking for answers. Instead, I just nodded and agreed that something felt off. We sat in uncomfortable silence, each of us probably thinking the same dark thoughts we weren't ready to voice out loud. At midnight, I finally went home to my apartment near campus, exhausted and confused and scared. I fell into bed fully clothed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cassidy's perfect appearance, her calculated tears, the way she'd asked about life insurance like she was planning a grocery list. And I kept thinking about that text message. Someone was watching me, warning me off. Which meant that whatever Cassidy was involved in, it was dangerous enough that people were willing to threaten a college student to keep it quiet. I'd stumbled into something much bigger than an affair, and I had no idea how deep it went or who else might be involved. But I knew one thing for certain: my brother's wife was not the woman we thought she was. The next morning brought terrible news. Dr. Hensley pulled us into a private consultation room with the kind of gentle professionalism that usually preceded devastating updates. Jareth's brain swelling had worsened overnight. The new medication wasn't working as hoped, and his other injuries were complicating recovery in ways they hadn't anticipated. "We need to consider more aggressive interventions, Doctor," Hensley explained, his hands folded carefully on the table between us. "There's a procedure that might relieve the pressure, but it's high risk. Without it, the damage could be permanent. With it, we might lose him on the operating table." Dad aged 10 years in the space of that conversation. Maribel went very quiet, the way nurses do when they're processing medical information that civilians can't fully understand. I felt like I was drowning, overwhelmed by decisions that no 22-year-old should have to help make. "What would Jareth want, Doctor?" Hensley asked gently. "Has he ever expressed wishes about this kind of situation?" We looked at each other helplessly. Jareth was 28, healthy, the kind of guy who lived like he was invincible. We'd never had conversations about end-of-life care or medical directives. "Why would we? He'd want to fight," Dad said finally. "My son's always been a fighter." "Where's Cassidy, Doctor?" Hensley asked. "As his wife, she has legal authority to make these decisions if you can't reach consensus as a family." That's when I realized we had a much bigger problem than I'd thought. Cassidy wasn't just emotionally absent, she was legally in control of Jareth's medical care. If she was involved in something criminal, if she actually wanted him to die, she could make that happen with a simple refusal to authorize treatment. "She'll be here soon," Maribel lied smoothly. "Can you give us an hour to discuss this as a family?" After Dr. Hensley left, we sat in that sterile conference room, trying to figure out how to make an impossible choice. But I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about the legal implications of what I'd discovered yesterday, and how much danger Jareth might be in from the one person who was supposed to protect him. "We need to call Cassidy," Dad said. "She needs to be here for this decision." I pulled out my phone, but before I could dial, it rang. Tanner's name appeared on the screen. "I have to take this," I told Dad and Maribel. "It's about work stuff." I stepped into the hallway. "Please tell me you have good news," I said without preamble. "Depends on your definition of good news." Tanner's voice was tight with tension. "I did some digging into Cassidy's background. The woman your brother married isn't who she claimed to be." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Her real name is Cassandra Mills, and she has a record. Fraud, identity theft, insurance scams. She's been married 3 times in the past 8 years, and 2 of her previous husbands died in suspicious accidents. The insurance companies investigated but could never prove anything conclusively." I leaned against the wall, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. "You're saying she's a professional widow?" "I'm saying she's a professional something, and it's not real estate. The Marcus guy from the emails, he's her partner in this. They've been running this scam for years, targeting men with substantial life insurance policies and high-risk jobs." The pieces started falling into place with horrifying clarity. Jareth's dangerous job, their quick courtship, the substantial life insurance policy he'd taken out after they got married. Cassidy had been planning this for years, and the construction accident had given her the perfect opportunity. "There's more," Tanner continued. "That scaffolding collapse wasn't an accident. I talked to some guys at the site. The safety inspector found evidence that critical bolts had been loosened deliberately. Someone sabotaged that scaffolding." Oh my God! I felt sick, dizzy, like the hospital corridor was spinning around me. "We have to tell the police." "We will, but we need more evidence first. What I've got so far is mostly circumstantial. We need to catch her in the act, get her on record doing something that proves intent. Tanner, she has legal authority over his medical care. The doctor wants to do a high-risk surgery, and she's the one who has to authorize it." If she refuses, then she gets what she wants without having to lift a finger. Jesus, Braden, this is worse than I thought. Where is she now? I don't know. She left last night and hasn't come back. She's supposed to be here for this medical decision, but she's not answering her phone. Listen carefully. Don't let them operate without getting her authorization on record. If she refuses treatment, that's evidence of intent. If she agrees, it buys us time to build a case. Either way, make sure everything is documented. I hung up feeling like I was suffocating. My brother wasn't just fighting for his life against his injuries. He was fighting against a woman who'd married him specifically to kill him, and she was winning. I went back to the conference room, where Dad and Maribel were still trying to reach Cassidy. They looked up at me hopefully. Any luck getting hold of her? Dad asked. Not yet. I sat down, trying to figure out how to explain what I'd learned without sending them into complete panic. Dad, I need to ask you something. How well do we really know Cassidy? I mean her background, her history before she met Jareth. Maribel frowned. What kind of question is that? She's been part of our family for 3 years. I know, but what do we actually know about her past? Her family, her previous relationships, where she came from. Dad thought about it for a moment. She said she grew up in Ohio, moved here for work. Her parents died in a car accident when she was young. No siblings. She was pretty vague about details, but some people don't like talking about painful memories. Did Jareth ever mention checking her background? You know, for the marriage license, insurance applications, anything like that. Braden, what's this about? Maribel's voice carried a warning tone. Your brother is fighting for his life and you're asking questions about paperwork. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Hello? Stop asking questions. The voice was electronically distorted, unrecognizable. Your brother had an accident. Accept it and move on. Keep digging and he might have another accident. So might you. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. Who was that? Dad asked. Wrong number. I stood up abruptly. I'm going to go check on Jareth, see if there's been any change. I needed time to think, to figure out how to handle what I knew. The threat had been clear. Stop investigating or face consequences. But how could I stop when my brother's life was on the line? In Jareth's room, I sat beside his bed and watched the machines keep him alive. He looked so fragile, so different from the big brother who'd always seemed indestructible. The bruising on his face had started to fade, but the swelling was worse. Doctor Hensley was right. Without intervention, the brain damage might be permanent. I don't know what to do, I whispered to his unconscious form. If I tell Dad and Maribel the truth, it might kill them. If I don't, it might kill you. And I'm scared, Jareth. I'm really scared. His heart monitor beeped steadily, the only response I was going to get. I held his hand and tried to remember the last conversation we'd had. It was just 3 days ago, something casual about him helping me move furniture in my apartment this weekend. Normal, everyday brother stuff that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Touching scene. I spun around to find Cassidy standing in the doorway. She was dressed differently today, jeans and a sweater, more casual, but still perfectly put together. Still tan, still wearing that expensive perfume that didn't match someone who'd been grieving for 2 days. Where have you been? I asked. The doctor needs to talk to you about a surgery. I know. I spoke with Dr. Hensley in the hallway. She moved to the other side of Jareth's bed, positioning herself so she could watch both him and me. It's a difficult decision. Difficult how? He needs the surgery to survive. She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that seemed much colder than I remembered. The risks are significant, Braden. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let nature take its course. The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. Let nature take its course. Like she was talking about a dying houseplant instead of her husband. That doesn't sound like something the Cassidy I know would say, I replied carefully. People change when faced with tragedy. You learn what's really important. She reached out and touched Jareth's face with what looked like genuine tenderness, but I noticed she was careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go. And sometimes it means fighting for every possible chance. We stared at each other across Jareth's unconscious body, and I realized we were having 2 different conversations. On the surface, we were discussing medical ethics and difficult choices. Underneath, we were negotiating for my brother's life. I've made my decision, she said finally. I'm going to refuse the surgery. The risks are too high, and I won't put him through unnecessary suffering. You can't do that. I'm his wife. It's my legal right. Dad and Maribel won't let you. Dad and Maribel don't have any legal standing. Her voice had gone flat, businesslike. I've already spoken with the hospital's legal department. As his spouse, my decision is final. I felt panic rising in my throat. This was it. The moment she'd been working toward for months or maybe years. All she had to do was refuse treatment, and Jareth would die from his injuries. Natural causes, no questions asked, insurance money collected. What if I told you I know about Marcus? I said quietly. For just an instant, her mask slipped. Fear flickered across her face before the composed expression returned. I don't know what you're talking about. What if I told you I know about the divorce papers, the apartment listings, the emails? Now she looked as genuinely concerned, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of guilt or shame, I saw calculation. She was figuring out how much I knew and how much trouble I could cause. You've been going through my personal things, she said. That's illegal, you know. Breaking and entering, invasion of privacy, not as illegal as insurance fraud or murder. She stepped back from the bed, her hand moving to her purse. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if she had a weapon, but she just pulled out her phone. I think you're having a breakdown, Braden. The stress of your brother's accident is making you paranoid, causing you to see conspiracies that don't exist. Maybe you should talk to someone. Maybe I should talk to the police and tell them what? That a grieving wife is making difficult medical decisions, that she had marriage problems she was working through in therapy. She smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen. You have no proof of anything, just the paranoid fantasies of a college kid who watches too many crime shows. He was right, and we both knew it. Everything I'd discovered could be explained away or dismissed as coincidence. The emails could be therapy exercises, the man at the house could be a contractor. The scaffolding sabotage would be hard to prove without more investigation. But I had one card left to play, and I decided to risk everything on it. What if I told you I know about your previous husbands? This time, her reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The color drained from her face, and her composed mask cracked completely. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was looking at the real Cassandra Mills instead of the performance she'd been putting on. You don't know anything, she whispered. I know enough. We stood there in silence, the only sound the steady beeping of Jareth's heart monitor. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to handle this new complication. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. Meet me at the house tonight, she said quietly. 10 o'clock. We need to have a conversation without interruptions. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll authorize that surgery after all. And I'll make sure the doctor knows that you've been under tremendous stress, making willed accusations, threatening family members. How long do you think it would take for them to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation? The threat was clear. She could destroy my credibility while simultaneously putting Jareth through a dangerous surgery that might kill him anyway. Either way, she'd get what she wanted. 10 o'clock, I agreed. She nodded and headed for the door, then turned back one more time. Braden, don't bring anyone with you. This conversation is between family. After she left, I sat with Jareth in the quiet of the ICU, my mind racing with possibilities. I was walking into a trap, but I didn't see any other choice. If I involved Dad and Maribel, she'd ruin my credibility before I could prove anything. If I went to the police without concrete evidence, they'd dismiss me as a grief-stricken kid, making wild accusations. But if I met with her tonight, if I could get her to admit what she'd done, maybe I could save my brother's life. I just had to survive the conversation first. I spent the afternoon making preparations that felt like writing my own will. I called Tanner and explained the situation, giving him copies of everything I'd found and detailed instructions about what to do if something happened to me. I wrote a long letter to Dad and Maribel, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on my apartment counter where it couldn't be missed. I also made one more discovery that changed everything. While going through Jareth's personal papers again, looking for anything that might help, I found a life insurance policy I'd missed before. Not the work policy I'd been thinking about, but a private one Jareth had taken out 6 months ago. $2 million, with Cassidy as the sole beneficiary. But there was something else, a handwritten note in Jareth's distinctive scrawl, paper clipped to the policy. If something happens to me, check the hidden camera in the bedroom closet. Password is Mom's maiden name, poor wedding date. My hands were shaking as I read it. Jareth had been suspicious too. He'd been documenting something, preparing for a possibility he hoped would never come. But what had he seen that made him take such precautions? I drove to their house at 9:30, wanting to arrive early and check for that camera before Cassidy showed up. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses showing the warm glow of evening television through drawn curtains. Normal families living normal lives, unaware that a potential murder was being planned 3 houses down. The front door was unlocked again, which immediately put me on edge. Inside, the house felt different than it had yesterday. Colder, more sterile, like someone had been systematically removing all traces of warmth and personality. I found the camera exactly where Jareth's note had indicated, hidden behind clothes in the master bedroom closet. It was small, sophisticated, the kind of device used for home security or private investigation. The memory card was missing, but there was a backup drive connected to their home computer. Using Jareth's password combination, I accessed files that made my blood run cold. Hours of video footage dating back 3 months. Cassidy entertaining Marcus in their bedroom while Jareth was at work. Phone conversations where she discussed getting rid of the problem and making it look natural. Most damning of all, a recording from 2 weeks ago where she and Marcus discussed the scaffolding job in detail. The inspection isn't until Friday, Cassidy's voice said clearly through the computer speakers. If we do it Thursday night, nobody will notice until it's too late. You're sure about which bolts to loosen? Marcus asked. I've been studying the blueprints for weeks. 3 specific connection points on the north side. It'll look like a structural failure, metal fatigue, completely natural. And you'll be somewhere with an alibi. Client meeting in Harbor City. 40 people will see me there. I'll get the call about the accident, rush to the hospital, play the grieving wife. I sat in stunned silence as their voices laid out the entire plan. They'd murdered my brother as surely as if they'd pushed him off that scaffolding personally, and now they were waiting for him to die so they could collect the insurance money and disappear together. I copied all the files to a flash drive, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. This was the evidence I needed. This would put them both away for life. But I still had to survive the next hour to deliver it to the police. At exactly 10 p.m., I heard Cassidy's car in the driveway. I quickly shut down the computer and moved to the living room, trying to appear casual despite my racing heart. She entered through the front door like she owned the place, which I guess she did. She wasn't alone. Marcus followed her inside, the same man I'd seen searching the house yesterday. He was bigger than he'd looked from upstairs, with the kind of build that came from physical labor and probably prison time. His eyes were cold, professional, the look of someone who'd done terrible things for money. "Hello, Braden," Cassidy said pleasantly, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of a confrontation about murder. "I believe you've met Marcus, though not officially. You're the one who's been sending me threatening text messages," I said. Marcus smiled without warmth. Among other things, they moved to block the exits, and I realized how completely I'd walked into their trap. No one knew exactly where I was. If I disappeared, it would look like a grief-stricken college student who'd run away or hurt himself. Another tragic consequence of Jareth's accident. "Let's skip the pretense," Cassidy said, settling into Jareth's favorite chair like she belonged there. "You know why we're here. The question is what we're going to do about it. I know you killed my brother." "Your brother isn't dead," she corrected. "Yet, that's actually what we need to discuss." Marcus pulled out a chair from the dining room and sat backward on it, his arms crossed over the back. "Kid's been poking around where he doesn't belong. Found some things he shouldn't have found." "The camera footage," I said. "The recordings of you planning the scaffolding sabotage." Cassidy's eyebrows raised slightly. "Clever. I wondered why Jareth had been acting strange lately. He suspected something. He suspected his wife was planning to murder him for insurance money. Turns out he was right." "Murder is such an ugly word," she said mildly. "I prefer to think of it as solving a problem. Jareth was never going to be enough for me. The job, the house, the life he could provide, it was all so small, so limiting. But his life insurance policy, that was going to give me freedom." The casual way she talked about destroying my brother made me sick. "How many times have you done this?" "This is only my 3rd, she said proudly. "But I've gotten much better at it. The first 2 were messier, more obvious. This time I took my time, planned every detail. It would have been perfect if you hadn't started interfering." Marcus leaned forward. "Which brings us to our current problem. You know too much and you're not going to stay quiet about it." "You're right about that. So, we have 2 options," Cassidy continued. "Option 1, you disappear. Tonight. Permanently. We make it look like you couldn't handle watching your brother die. So you took your own life. Very sad, very believable. And option 2, you keep your mouth shut, let nature take its course with Jareth, and we split the insurance money with you. $1 million for your silence and cooperation. I stared at her in disbelief. You think I would take money to let my brother die? I think you're a college student with debt and no prospects who just got offered more money than he'll see in 10 years of working. I think you're practical enough to recognize a good deal when you see one. You're insane if you think I'd agree to that. She sighed, like I was being unreasonably difficult. I was hoping you'd be smarter about this. Marcus? He stood up, reaching inside his jacket. I expected a gun, but instead he pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. Fentanyl, he explained conversationally. Overdose will look like you couldn't handle the stress. Turn to drugs to cope. Very common among college students these days. This was it. They were going to kill me right here in Jareth's living room, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. But maybe I could still save my brother. Wait, I said. Before you do this, I need to know something. Why Jareth? Why target him specifically? Cassidy smiled like she was remembering something pleasant. He was perfect. Dangerous job, substantial insurance, recent enough relationship that I could insert myself into his life without too much scrutiny. And he was so trusting, so eager to believe in love. It made everything easier. You never loved him at all. Love is a luxury I can't afford. But I played the role well, don't you think? Right up until the end, he believed I was devoted to. He knew. The words came out harder than I'd intended. He figured out what you were planning. That's why he installed the camera. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. You're lying. He left me a note, told me where to find the evidence. He knew you were going to try to kill him, and he made sure there would be proof when you did. Marcus and Cassidy exchanged glances. This was information they hadn't expected, a complication in their perfect plan. Where's the note? Marcus demanded. Safe, along with copies of all the video footage, sent to multiple people with instructions about what to do if something happens to me. I was lying, but I sold it with enough conviction to make them hesitate. The truth was that only Tanner had copies, and he wouldn't know to act unless I failed to check in tomorrow. But they didn't need to know that. You're bluffing, Cassidy said, but she didn't sound certain anymore. Am I? Check the computer. Check the flash drives. Your entire conversation about loosening the scaffolding bolts is recorded in high definition. Even if you kill me, that evidence is going to surface. Marcus moved toward the computer, but I continued talking, trying to buy time. The police are already suspicious about the scaffolding collapse. They know it was sabotage. When Jareth dies and you collect the insurance money, they're going to investigate. And when they do, they're going to find out about your previous husbands, your real identity, everything. Shut up, Cassidy snapped, her composed mask finally cracking. You don't know anything about my previous situation. 2 husbands, both dead in suspicious accidents, both with substantial life insurance policies. The pattern is clear, and you've gotten sloppy. This time there's evidence. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Marcus kept his position between me and the door, but he looked uncertain now too. Their perfect plan was falling apart, and they were having to improvise. We changed the plan, Cassidy said finally. Kill him tonight, make it look like a break-in gone wrong. Then we disappear before anyone finds the evidence. That's not going to work, Marcus objected. Too many variables, too much risk. If there really is evidence out there, then we have to assume it's going to surface eventually. Our only option is to run. They were arguing now, their careful coordination breaking down under pressure. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I lunged toward the front door, but Marcus was faster. He caught me before I'd taken 3 steps, his arm around my throat in a chokehold that cut off my air supply. I struggled, but he was much stronger, and darkness started creeping in around the edges of my vision. Enough, Cassidy said sharply. We need to think this through. Marcus loosened his grip enough for me to breathe, but kept me restrained. My throat felt like it was on fire, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Here's what's going to happen, Cassidy announced. We're going to take a drive to the hospital. You're going to convince your father and Maribel that you've been under stress, making wild accusations, and that you're sorry for causing problems. Then you're going to support my decision to refuse the surgery. And if I don't, then Marcus is going to pay visits to your father and Maribel. Terrible accidents happen all the time. Construction sites, car crashes, home invasions. Would be such a shame if this family tragedy got even worse. The threat was clear and credible. These people had already murdered at least 3 men for insurance money. They wouldn't hesitate to kill more family members to protect their scheme. But I had one last card to play, and it was time to use it. "There's something else you need to know," I said quietly. "Something about Jareth that changes everything." "What? He's awake." The words hit them like physical blows. Marcus's grip loosened in surprise, and Cassidy went pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The doctors said." "The doctors were wrong. He woke up 2 hours ago. And the first thing he did was tell the police everything he remembered about the scaffolding collapse. It was a complete lie, but I delivered it with total conviction. And for just a moment, I saw real fear in both their faces. I broke free from Marcus's loosened grip and dove toward the kitchen, not trying to escape, but reaching for the knife block on the counter. I managed to grab a paring knife before Marcus tackled me, both of us crashing into the refrigerator hard enough to knock magnets and photos to the floor. The knife skittered across the linoleum as we struggled, and I could hear Cassidy screaming at Marcus to control the situation. But the lie I'd told about Jareth being awake had rattled them both, and their careful coordination was completely broken now. Marcus was stronger, but I was younger and more desperate. I managed to knee him in the stomach hard enough to double him over, then scrambled toward the back door. But instead of trying to escape, I did something that caught them both off guard. I started screaming at the top of my lungs. "Help! Someone call the police. They're trying to kill me." The neighborhood was quiet, and my voice carried clearly through the night air. I could see lights coming on in nearby houses, people moving toward windows to see what was happening. "Shut him up," Cassidy hissed, but it was too late. Marcus lunged for me again, but I dodged around the kitchen island, keeping the granite countertop between us. I continued screaming, naming them both, shouting about murder and insurance fraud and everything I'd discovered. "Cassidy Mills murdered my brother. She sabotaged the scaffolding. Call 911. Cassidy grabbed her phone and started frantically making calls, probably to warn other partners or arrange emergency escape plans. But I could see panic in her movements now. Their careful, calculated plan had devolved into chaos, and chaos was something they couldn't control. Marcus vaulted over the kitchen island, but I was already moving toward the front door. I could hear voices outside now, neighbors talking to each other. Someone definitely calling the police. The cavalry was coming if I could just survive a few more minutes. But then Cassidy pulled out a gun. It was small, elegant, the kind of weapon that looked almost decorative until you saw it pointed at your chest. Her hand was steady despite everything that had happened, and her eyes had gone cold and professional again. "Enough," she said quietly. "Everyone stop moving." The kitchen went silent, except for our heavy breathing and the distant sound of approaching sirens. Marcus straightened up, his face grim. I stood frozen by the front door, close enough to touch the handle, but knowing I'd never make it outside before she pulled the trigger. "We're leaving," she announced. "Marcus, get the car started. Braden, you're coming with us." "Where are you going to run?" I asked, playing for time. "The police will be looking for you. The FBI will be looking for you. There's nowhere you can hide. There are countries that don't extradite for insurance fraud," she replied calmly. "We've been preparing for this possibility. What about the evidence? What about Jareth's testimony when he wakes up?" "Jareth isn't going to wake up. Before we leave town, I'm going to authorize that surgery after all, and I'm going to make sure there are complications." The casual way she planned to murder my brother, even now when everything was falling apart, made me understand that I was dealing with someone completely without conscience or remorse. She'd killed before, and she'd kill again, as many times as necessary to get what she wanted. The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. Marcus had his hand on the door to the garage, ready to make their escape. In a few minutes they'd be gone, and I'd be dead or disappeared, and Jareth would die alone in a hospital room, while his murderer fled to some non-extradition country with $2 million. Unless I did something desperate. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a ceramic vase from the hall table, and hurled it through the front window. Glass exploded outward onto the lawn, the sound sharp and unmistakable. Then I started screaming again. "In here! They have guns! Cassidy Mills is a murderer!" The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. The bullet took a chunk out of the doorframe 6 inches from my head, and I felt splinters of wood sting my face. But the shot had been rushed, angry, not carefully aimed. More importantly, every neighbor within 3 blocks had now heard gunfire coming from this house. Cassidy swore violently and moved toward me. The gun extended, but before she could fire again, The front door exploded inward as police officers used a battering ram to breach it. "Drop your weapon. Get on the ground now." Everything happened very quickly after that. Cassidy spun toward the officers, raising her gun, and I dove behind the couch as multiple weapons fired simultaneously. Marcus tried to run through the garage but found more officers waiting outside, the house filled with tactical gear and shouted commands, and the organized chaos of law enforcement. Securing a crime scene. When the shooting stopped, Cassidy was down but not dead, screaming about police brutality and demanding lawyers. Marcus was face down on the kitchen floor with 3 officers on top of him. And I was sitting behind a couch, covered in broken glass and splinters, alive against all odds. The next few hours passed in a blur of paramedics, detectives, evidence technicians, and crime scene tape. I gave statements, turned over the flash drive with the video evidence, and explained everything I'd discovered about the insurance fraud scheme. By dawn, the investigation had expanded to include FBI financial crimes specialists and detectives from 2 other states where Cassidy's previous husbands had died. But the most important moment came at 6 a.m. when Detective Rodriguez found me in the hospital cafeteria, exhausted and running on adrenaline and bad coffee. "Your brother's awake," she said simply. I ran to his room faster than I'd ever moved in my life. Dad and Maribel were already there, crying and laughing and holding his hands. Jareth looked terrible, still swollen, still connected to machines, still obviously in pain, but his eyes were open and alert, tracking movement around the room. "Hey, little brother," he said when he saw me, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "I hear you've been busy." I started crying then, all the fear and stress and terror of the past few days finally hitting me. "I thought we were going to lose you. Can't get rid of me that easy." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Detective told me what happened, what you figured out about Cassidy." "I'm sorry, Jareth. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner, didn't protect you. You did protect me. You saved my life." His eyes were serious despite the medication and exhaustion. "The camera footage, the evidence you found, that's what's going to put them away forever." Dad cleared his throat, looking older than I'd ever seen him, but also relieved in ways that went deeper than words. "Detective Rodriguez says they found evidence linking Cassidy to 3 other deaths. She's looking at multiple life sentences. What about Marcus?" I asked. "Rolled over immediately," Jareth replied with grim satisfaction. "Gave them names, dates, bank accounts, everything. Turns out this operation was bigger than we thought. They had partners in 6 states targeting men with high-risk jobs and substantial life insurance." Maribel wiped tears from her eyes. "The important thing is that you're both safe now. The nightmare is over. But I knew it wasn't quite over yet. There would be trials, testimony, months of legal proceedings to put these people away." Jareth had a long recovery ahead of him, both physically and emotionally. The betrayal by someone he'd loved and trusted would leave scars that might never fully heal. Still, sitting in that hospital room, with my family intact and the truth finally exposed, it felt like the beginning of something better. Justice wasn't complete yet, but it was coming. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. "There's one thing I still don't understand," I said to Jareth. "Why did you install that camera? What made you suspicious?" He was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength to tell the story. "About a month ago, I came home early from work with a migraine. Found her on the phone in our bedroom, talking to someone about insurance payouts and timeline management. When she saw me, she claimed it was a work call, real estate stuff. But something about her tone, the way she looked, caught." He paused, wincing as he adjusted position in the bed. "I started paying attention after that. Little things. She'd get mysterious phone calls and step outside. She was asking weird questions about my work schedule, which job sites I'd be on which days. She wanted to know about my insurance policies, kept suggesting I increase the coverage amounts." "Why didn't you say anything to us?" Dad asked. "Because I loved her, and I wanted to be wrong. I thought maybe she was planning some kind of surprise, or maybe I was being paranoid. The camera was insurance, just in case. I never really believed." His voice trailed off. "She fooled all of us," Maribel said gently. "Evil like that is hard to recognize when it's wrapped in charm and false affection." Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, looking tired but satisfied. "Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to update you on the case status. Cassidy Mills, her real name is Sandra Kellerman, has been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about a dozen other felonies. Marcus Chen is cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. We've identified at least 6 other victims across multiple states. Will she go to prison? I asked. For the rest of her life, if I have anything to say about it, Rodriguez replied grimly. The evidence you gathered is ironclad. The video footage alone is enough to convict her 10 times over. After the detective left, we sat in comfortable silence for a while, just grateful to be together and alive. Through the window, I could see the sun rising over the city, painting everything in golden light that felt like hope. But there was still one more thing I needed to know. Jareth, are you going to be okay? I mean really okay, not just physically, but... He understood what I was asking. It's going to be hard, knowing that someone I trusted completely was planning to kill me for money. But I'll get through it. We all will. He squeezed my hand again, stronger this time. Besides, I've got the best little brother in the world watching my back. I think I'm going to be just fine. 6 months later, I stood in a crowded courthouse as Judge Patricia Hoffman sentenced Sandra Kellerman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The woman who had called herself Cassidy Mills looked nothing like the charming, devoted wife who had once been part of our family. Prison had stripped away all the carefully constructed beauty and polish, revealing the cold calculation underneath. She showed no remorse during sentencing, no acknowledgement of the lives she'd destroyed. Even when the families of her previous victims gave impact statements that left the entire courtroom in tears, she sat stone-faced and emotionless. The only time she showed any reaction was when the judge denied her request for the sentences to run concurrently instead of consecutively. The defendant has shown a pattern of calculated predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade, Judge Hoffman said in her final remarks. She selected vulnerable victims, inserted herself into their lives through false pretenses, and murdered them for financial gain. This represents one of the most callous and premeditated series of crimes this court has ever encountered. Marcus Chen had already been sentenced to 25 years for his role in the conspiracy. His cooperation had helped prosecutors build cases against the entire network, leading to arrests in 6 states and the recovery of over $4 million in fraudulent insurance claims. But the legal victory felt secondary to the personal healing that had taken place in our family over those 6 months. Jareth's recovery had been long and difficult. The head trauma had caused memory issues and recurring headaches. He'd needed 3 additional surgeries to repair damage to his ribs and internal organs. Physical therapy had been grueling, and there were days when he questioned whether he'd ever be whole again. The emotional healing had been even harder. Learning that someone you loved had been planning your murder for months creates a kind of trauma that doesn't heal quickly. Jareth had nightmares, panic attacks, episodes of depression where he couldn't get out of bed for days. He'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in victims of violent crime, and slowly, gradually, he was learning to trust again. He'd moved in with Dad temporarily while he recovered, and their relationship had grown stronger than it had been since I was a child. Dad had always struggled with expressing emotions, but nearly losing Jareth had broken down walls that had stood for decades. They talked now in ways they never had before, about feelings and fears and the kind of deep stuff that makes families actually family instead of just people who share DNA. Maribel had been incredible throughout everything. She'd taken family leave from her job to help care for Jareth, driving him to appointments, helping with exercises, making sure he took medications on schedule. But more than that, she'd provided the kind of steady, unconditional love that helps people heal from betrayal. She never said, "I told you so," about the warning signs we'd all missed. She never made Jareth feel guilty for trusting someone who turned out to be evil. She just loved him through the worst period of his life, the way mothers do. As for me, I'd changed in ways I was still figuring out. The experience had made me more suspicious of people's motives, more aware of the capacity for evil that can hide behind charm and false affection. But it had also shown me how strong family bonds could be when tested, how much we were willing to sacrifice for each other when it really mattered. I'd changed my major from economics to criminal justice, partly because the case had shown me how much I enjoyed investigative work, but mostly because I wanted to help other families who found themselves in similar situations. Detective Rodriguez had become a mentor, teaching me about evidence collection, witness interviewing, and the patient work of building cases against people who thought they were too smart to get caught. The insurance companies had been surprisingly cooperative once the fraud was exposed. They'd not only paid out Jareth's legitimate medical claims quickly, but had also contributed to a victims fund that helped cover expenses for the families of Cassidy's previous targets. The construction company had implemented new safety protocols and had hired an independent inspector to review all their work sites. But the most important change had been in how we related to each other as a family. We had dinner together every Sunday now, all four of us around Dad's kitchen table. We talked about real things, work and relationships and fears and dreams, instead of just polite small talk. We'd established traditions that bound us together, movie nights, fishing trips, holiday celebrations that felt genuine instead of obligatory. Jareth had started dating again, cautiously and with a lot of support from all of us. He'd met Sarah through his physical therapy program. She was a nurse who understood trauma and healing, who didn't try to rush him past his emotional scars or pretend they didn't exist. Their relationship was growing slowly, built on honesty and genuine compatibility instead of manipulation and false promises. "You know what's weird?" Jareth said as we walked out of the courthouse after the sentencing. "I almost feel sorry for her." Dad looked at him sharply. "After everything she did to you? To all of us? Not sorry for the consequences. She deserves everything she gets. But sorry for whatever made her into someone who could destroy lives without feeling anything." Jareth was quiet for a moment, thinking, what must it be like to live without the ability to love anyone, to see other people only as opportunities for profit? It was a profound observation, the kind of insight that comes from surviving something terrible and choosing to grow from it, instead of being destroyed by it. Jareth had every right to hate Cassidy Mills, to want revenge, to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he'd chosen understanding and forgiveness, not for her sake, but for his own. Maribel linked her arm through his. "That's how I know you're going to be okay. Really okay. You've got too much love in your heart to let evil win." We went to lunch at a small restaurant near the courthouse, the same place we'd started meeting for Sunday dinners 6 months earlier. It had become our family place, somewhere we could talk freely without worrying about who might overhear. "So what now?" Dad asked as we waited for our food. "Is this chapter of our lives finally closed?" "I think so," I replied. "The appeals process will take years, but her conviction is solid. The evidence was overwhelming. I'm more interested in what comes next for all of us." Maribel said, "We've been through hell together, but we've also learned things about ourselves and each other that we might never have discovered otherwise." She was right. The crisis had stripped away all the polite pretenses and comfortable assumptions that had defined our family relationships for years. We'd seen each other at our most vulnerable, most frightened, most desperate, and somehow that had made us closer instead of driving us apart. "I want to buy a bigger house," Dad announced suddenly. "Something with enough room for all of us when we want to be together. Maybe a big kitchen where Maribel can teach Sarah how to make her famous lasagna. A workshop where Jareth and I can build things together when he's feeling up to it. A study where Braden can spread out all his criminal justice textbooks and solve cold cases." It was the most sentimental thing I'd ever heard him say, and it perfectly captured what we'd all been feeling but hadn't known how to express. We wanted to be a family in the fullest sense, not just people who were related, but people who chose to build a life together. "I'd like that," Jareth said softly. "I'd really like that." Our food arrived and we ate in comfortable conversation about ordinary things, work schedules and weekend plans, and whether we should try that new movie everyone was talking about. Normal family stuff that felt precious because we'd almost lost the chance to have it. As we were finishing dessert, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rodriguez. "Case officially closed. Kellerman's appeals will be handled by someone else. Thought you'd want to know. You did good work, kid. Keep in touch." I showed the message to everyone, and Dad raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To Detective Braden Walsh, who saved his brother's life and put a murderer behind bars. To family," I countered, raising my own cup. "To people who stick together when everything falls apart. To second chances," Jareth added. "And third chances, and as many chances as it takes to get it right. To love that's stronger than evil," Maribel finished. "To healing that's deeper than hurt." We clinked our cups together in the middle of the table, and I felt a sense of completion that had been missing for months. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served, but more importantly, we'd discovered that our family was strong enough to survive anything, and that discovery was going to serve us well for whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that evening, as we sat on Dad's front porch watching the sun set, Jareth pulled out his phone and showed us something that made us all smile. It was a picture Sarah had sent of a house for sale 2 blocks away. Big kitchen, workshop space in the garage, 4 bedrooms, a study that got great natural light. The asking price was reasonable, and the realtor, a legitimate one this time, thought our offer would be competitive. "What do you think?" Dad asked, studying the photos. I think it looks like home, I replied. And for the first time in months, that felt like the complete truth.